a special cover story conversation. Today we have with us former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shyam Saran. We're going to be talking to him about what is happening in India and its immediate neighborhood. I'm, of course, going to be talking about Sri Lanka, but also India's place in this neighborhood, keeping in mind Nepal, keeping in mind Pakistan, and also the impact of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Shyam Saran, for this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
First question is, of course, regarding Sri Lanka and the immediate news that we've got from there, that they've had a change. They've had Wickremesinghe taking over as Prime Minister. How does that impact? How do you see things falling out after that?
Well, I understand that the protests are still continuing. So if the idea was that the appointment of Ranil would in some way, dampen these widespread protests, so far that has not happened. So we will have to wait and see whether or not that particular objective is met. The second, and of course the more important aspect is whether Ranil, given the fact that he has a great deal of experience, of course, he has been Prime Minister about 5 times before, I think, of Sri Lanka. So it is, I think, an expectation that by putting him in the position of Prime Minister, perhaps, the economic crisis will begin to ameliorate, will begin to, improve. Now, the kind of economic challenges which, frankly, Sri Lanka is facing at this point of time, no matter how good a Prime Minister you have, these are very difficult issues to resolve. For a small country like this, to see that there is $51 billion worth of loans that are outstanding, something like half of that will become due within the next few years. The foreign exchange reserves are down to some millions rather than a couple of billion. So all in all, it is a very difficult situation. So yes, we wish him all the best in his endeavors. It, to some extent, partially meets the political demands that there should be a change. But, the main demand is that the president himself should go.
Yes, that was going to be my next question, because there's an executive presidency in Sri Lanka.
Yes. But of course, as you would imagine, it is of great concern to us how the situation develops in Sri Lanka. It is a strategically very important country for India. And you might have seen that we, as India, we have extended a considerable amount of assistance and support to Sri Lanka, and I'm sure that we will continue to do so. But it's very important that we should make clear that this support is for the people of Sri Lanka. I think it is a very, very fine kind of a distinction that must be made in the political discourse, in the manner in which we present this, that this is not in order to bail out a unpopular government, but this is really India's effort to try and, improve the kind of situation that the ordinary people of Sri Lanka are confronting.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How much should we commit ourselves in terms of aid? Should we again send the army? Because I was just in conversation with the former IPK chief, Lieutenant General Kalkat, and he was very against sending the army. He says, don't repeat the mistakes of 87. But there are some people within the BJP also who are saying send the army. So.
Well, I would agree with General Kalkat that we should not be sending boots on the ground. The experience with the IPKF itself was not a very, positive experience, as you would recall. The point is this, yes, we are deeply concerned, as I said, about the situation in Sri Lanka. But my experience as Foreign Secretary has been that, there are occasions where we should intervene and we should try and, help manage the situation. There are occasions where you should get out of the way, where there are very major tectonic kind of changes taking place, and there is a huge sort of public emotion which is also involved. India intervening can only complicate the situation. As you know, there is also very deep sort of nationalist feeling amongst all our neighbors. So we have to be extremely careful that we don't put ourselves in a position where we become the target in a sense of the public dissatisfaction. So I would say that this is one of those occasions where it is better for us to get out of the way and let, whatever, political changes that are taking place, let them take place. Our interest, as has been also expressed by our Ministry of External Affairs, is that our effort, our objective is to try and alleviate the suffering of the people of Sri Lanka, not to get involved in the political shadow play which may be taking place there.
But that saying, China will rushes in where India fails to tread. So are we worried about China taking over?
I have been one person who believes that we should not be constantly, trying to benchmark ourselves with China. China has its own strengths. China has its own advantages. India has its own. Rather than try to, catch up with China all the time in our neighborhood, we should really be focused on strengthening and on leveraging the various advantages that we may have in the relationship. That is a better way to deal with the China challenge. And in the case of Sri Lanka, there are two things. One, there is already considerable, negative sentiment in Sri Lanka about the support of China to the, Rajapaksa family. It is China which has invested a huge amount of money in the Hambantota area, which is Rajapaksa's constituency. So there is a general sentiment within Sri Lanka that it is Chinese support, Chinese money, which has enabled the Rajapaksa family to rule the roost for a long time. So I'm not so worried that, China will jump in and will be able to turn the situation in its favor. It has been good that India has been in a somewhat lower profile over the last few years. The other aspect that we have to keep in mind is that currently my sense is that China is very preoccupied with its own domestic challenges and also because of the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war on China. So I see that there is a certain drawing back by China in terms of its very extended commitments, not just in our region, but elsewhere as well. So I do not take that as a major risk.
Attribute the reign and the rise and the ruin of the Rajapaksa family? Is it, economics, yes, of course. Is it just corruption, or is it their decision to go organic? What finally brought them down?
Well, all of them together, really. It was a perfect storm because of the simultaneity of a number of wrong decisions on the one hand, but also very real difficulties which were, spawned by, say, the COVID-19 pandemic. After all, Sri Lanka draws a large part of its income from tourism. That is one of the major, foreign exchange earners, major source of revenue. Now, that has been very badly hit thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in addition, as you mentioned, there was the, very, I think, wrong decision to overnight introduce organic farming without really taking into account that this changeover, needs to be spread over a longer period of time. As somebody, interested in climate change, I would have said, yes, this is a good decision. But, it is a good decision which should have been implemented in a somewhat more systematic, in a gradual manner. And thirdly, no doubt that there was an overexposure of Sri Lanka to foreign debt, which is really has brought the country to this point of bankruptcy.
But the exposure of Sri Lanka to foreign debt is gradual. It's not happening just during Rajapaksa's time.
No, it hasn't, but it has certainly become much worse during the Rajapaksa time because they have gone on a spending spree on infrastructure development. Now, infrastructure development by itself is a good thing. That you take, capital from abroad to build up infrastructure is fine, provided that infrastructure then leads to income generation. Because after all, you have to pay for what you have spent on that infrastructure. I think in the case of Sri Lanka, what has happened is that some of the infrastructure which has been put in place is not generating enough income. As you are aware, Hambantota has virtually no traffic. You have an airport which has been put up, which hardly has a few tens of passengers every day. So what is the point in setting up large infrastructure projects which are not able to generate the income that is required in order to make that project viable? This has been a very major issue in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. You really explained it well for me. I just wanted to, since I have you, help me understand where we stand vis-a-vis Nepal, where we stand vis-a-vis the regime change in Pakistan. Are we better off or not? But first, Nepal, since the Prime Minister is there also.
Well, the Prime Minister is going to Lumbini, I believe, later this month. So, in a sense, there is a kind of a normalization of the political relationship, which is underway. I won't say that it has been fully normalized, but it is good that we are moving in that direction. Because the key issue between India and Nepal today is really their unilateral and completely unjustified the depiction of territory which has been Indian territory since the ages, and which also were reflected in Nepal's own maps. To suddenly one day, say that this land actually belongs to us, not engage in any consultations with India, which is part of the mechanism that we have, and to unilaterally show that this is part of Nepali territory. This is a lot which will be very difficult to resolve. Sorry?
So, don't you see the role of China in Nepal? How behind all this sudden
if China's role in Nepal is the same as China's role throughout our neighborhood. I think what China's policy has been for a long time, it is not something new, that, India should remain tethered in the subcontinent, because it is very obvious that unless India is able to manage its own periphery well, unless India's own neighborhood is stable, it is economically prosperous, it is very difficult for India to actually play an optimal role regionally and an optimal role globally. Because, every time there is some crisis or challenge in our neighborhood, it draws you back to the neighborhood. So if India is looking at playing a larger role in the region, as I said, you have to first get your neighborhood right. And in that sense, China has been a challenge not only today, but it has been a challenge for quite a long time, beginning with the China-Pakistan, alliance. But it has, as China has become more powerful, as China has greater resources to be able to deploy, we are seeing the results of that in each and every country, including Sri Lanka, as you saw some time ago in the Maldives. So this is a continuing challenge, but it has become a more intensified challenge in our neighborhood. So this is where I pointed out earlier that for me, the response from India has to be not to try and catch up with China in each and every area, but to see, okay, like a good businessman, what are our assets? What are our liabilities? How do we leverage our assets? How do we, try to minimize the vulnerabilities that we have? That is the only rational way of trying to, secure our neighborhood. Now, in that sense, Nepal is a critical country, and is a critical country also because we have an open border. So you can imagine that if there is a inimical force or a hostile force which is entrenched just across the border in Nepal, it can create a very serious, situation in our neighborhood. Similarly, with respect to Pakistan, we have been facing that issue for quite some time. The whole aspect of a possibility of a two-front war, as we say. I think currently, my sense is that the intensity of that threat, particularly the Chinese threat, has diminished somewhat. It has diminished because, as I mentioned to you, the kind of reaction, even public reaction that we see in Sri Lanka. In the Maldives, there has been a very major change with the change in government. The former president of the Maldives was in India recently. And I had invited him to speak to us at the India International Center. And he actually spelled out how China has used the loans and credits to really make the Maldives in hock really to China. So he pointed out, for example, that a very nice bridge has been made between the main island and the island on which the airport is. But the same problem that I mentioned to you before, that it is just simply not generating enough revenue. The traffic across the bridge is simply not enough to generate income. So in a sense, we are in a phase of a certain kind of a negative reaction to China in our neighborhood, and it is really up to us to try and take advantage of that.
Hold that thought, because we're going to go for a break, but I'm going to come back and keep this conversation going, so stay with us. Hello and welcome back to a cover story conversation with former Foreign Secretary Mr. Shyam Saran. Very interesting thought you left us off, and all slightly, I think, positive as far as India is concerned, that I think the neighborhood is now being a bit wary of China and its designs, and not just, don't take the help for granted. There's always some agenda behind the economic help. Pakistan, how do we deal with the regime?
So even in Pakistan, I would say there is these are maybe not major changes, but there is a certain shift, and diplomats should be aware of these shifts and try to see how you can take advantage of that. So what is the change in Pakistan? The main flagship project of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which was supposed to be a game changer for Pakistan, was also considered by China to be a kind of a model which could be followed by other countries who are on their famous Belt and Road initiative. Now, if you look at how this has actually played out, Pakistan is also facing a similar problem. That power sector, yes, the Chinese set up a number of coal-based thermal power plants. But the kind of tariff which is required to pay back the various independent power producers is politically very difficult to actually impose, because it is an energy-hungry country, an energy-poor country. With respect to some of the infrastructure projects, there have been delays, but more importantly, there are grave Chinese concerns about the security situation. As you know, that recently, their Confucius Institute director and a couple of staff members died in a suicide bombing, attack. So some of that relationship has soured somewhat. Also, even within the army, from what reports one get, I cannot say that these are absolutely, reliable reports. But one of the reasons why there was some kind of, shall I say, concern about the way Imran Khan was running the country's policy was that there was too close an identification with China and Russia precisely at the time when, the kind of polarization between the East and West is beginning to come back again. The whole image of Imran Khan being in Moscow, virtually, on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, the kind of image that it created was not very positive for Pakistan, and would have certainly greatly angered the United States and the Western countries. So I think there has been also a certain disquiet amongst the army leadership, as well as perhaps the Pakistani elite, that maybe we had gone too far in one direction and we need to have a certain degree of balance. So I can see the reason why there would be an attempt to try and see whether, Pakistan can try and expand a little bit its room for maneuver, not only by repairing its relationship with the West, particularly the United States of America, but also trying to the extent possible, also improve its relationship with India. So some noises have been made, some signals have been given. I'm not very sure whether we are responding to those signals, because this must be, not visible at this stage. But I would say that there is every reason at this stage for India and Pakistan to actually try and improve relations. Not become friendly countries, but at least countries which are able to manage the adversarial relationship between them.
Finally, before I let you go, your take on what is happening in Ukraine and also our response. We are walking the thin line. How long can we keep walking that line?
Well, I'm not very sure that we are walking a thin line. I do not agree with that, because there may be some kind of a sentiment here among some sections of India's elite, particularly the security community, that Russia is the aggrieved party, that Russia will finally come out the winner in this affair. I do not agree with that. Number one, India-Russia relations are not Indo-Soviet relations. We have come a very long way from the kind of relationship which existed before the collapse of the Soviet Union between India and the Soviet Union. That time the strategic partnership has as its very strong basis our common concern about the Chinese threat. Right?
Now.
Also, we were getting armaments of the kind from the Soviet Union, which China did not have access to. We had a special kind of a trading relationship with the Soviet Union at that time, which was quite substantial and important for India and important for the then Soviet Union. In 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and a complete change in that geopolitical landscape, there has been a steady marginalization of India's relations with Russia. Yes, there is a sentiment in India that the Soviet Union and Russia that is today stood by us during difficult times. That is true. Soviet Union provided us with arms which we could not get from elsewhere. That is certainly true. Russia today still assists India in some of the areas of high technology, which may not again be available from the West, like the submarine, nuclear submarine technology. But if you overall look at the trajectory of the relationship between the two countries, it has actually been steadily going down. And that one important basis for the partnership, which was a common concern about China, if you see recent trends in Russia-China relations, they are going in a direction which can only be of greater concern to India. So yes, there are good reasons for India to not take a kind of a publicly vocal stand against Russia. That does not mean that India does not have concerns about what Russia is doing. And I think our Western partners are quite aware of this, that, while they would, I would expect them to try and push India to take a more, explicit kind of stand against Russia. But I think there is an understanding, both in the United States and the West, that India-Russia relations are very different from what they were before. that India's stake in Russia and Russian stake in India is of a much lesser order than it used to be before. So I do not have much concern about this, that, we seem to be tightrope walking, or we seem to be getting ourselves into trouble. I'm not so sure about that. I think there is an understanding of India's position. And finally, I would like to say that it appears to me that whatever happens on the battlefield in Ukraine, my view has been that Russia has already lost the war.
Why? Because it's taken so long.
Even if it manages to leave Ukraine as a complete rubble, what does that outcome in terms of any rational objective, what does it give to Russia? It would have earned the enmity of a neighboring country for perhaps even generations to come. So I think in terms of how this is going to play itself out, it may linger on for some more time. And as I said, there may be some battlefield victories still for Russia. But I think Russia has lost out in terms of any rational objective. Look at Finland and Sweden wanting to now join NATO. Can Russia prevent it? It cannot. So if the idea was that the European security architecture should be transformed in a manner that includes Russia and also is sensitive to Russian interests, exactly the opposite has been achieved. So I do not think that the Russia-Ukraine war has a for us, I think we should accept that this is not going the way that the Russians would have wanted. And finally, that any kind of calculations with the Chinese may have made of hitching themselves together with Russia, expecting Ukraine to fall within few days, that Russia would, in a sense, emerge as a stronger entity in Europe, that has been belied. So to that extent, the Chinese also will have to rethink, their regional as well as global strategies.
Thank you, Mr. Shyam Saran. This has really been a learning curve for me. It's been a first conversation that we've had with you, but I hope to have many more because, as I said, it's insightful. I've learned a lot and you explain things very simply. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.